Hi, good afternoon. Welcome back to Digital Defense, the weekly cybersecurity web show broadcasting to you live from Bloomberg News, Washington, D.C. Bureau. I'm your host, Jordan Robertson. Thank you for joining us. As regular viewers of this show will know, this is your weekly source for tips and tricks to secure your digital life. We are talking today about a topic that is pretty near and dear to my heart. It is. I hope you guys enjoy it. And as always, please feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comment section, and we're going to answer as many of those in real time here as we can. So if anything I'm talking about here you have questions on, please don't hesitate to write in. That's the nature of the show, and we want you guys to be able to get all your questions answered. So let me just dive right in. I saw this story this week, and I thought it was just fascinating. It is there's a reporter for Gizmodo whose name is Kashmir Hill, and she does some really, really interesting reporting around. She's been doing a series of stories about how Facebook knows what it knows about your friend group. And the thing that has made this reporting so interesting and that I wanted to bring to you all today is that it's looking at the hidden ways, the kind of shadow profiles, as she calls it, that Facebook accumulates about you from data points that you would never normally assume the company collects about you. So what I wanted to do today was to walk you through some of her reporting, which again I think is really excellent and illuminating, and also provide some advice about how you can protect your identity and block Facebook from collecting or at least linking some of these data points that they collect about you that you may not have explicitly consented to. So without further ado, let me just summarize her reporting. The reporting, focuses on this idea that most people understand how the basic linking function of Facebook works. And that is this. Whenever you log into Facebook or whenever you set up an account, Facebook will prompt you to upload your contact list, whether that's from your phone or from your email, or from some other site. Everybody kind of understands that this prompt screen, which she shared in her story, it says Facebook's better with friends, see who's on Facebook by updating your contacts, get started. This is presented to users as a way to ensure that your contacts in real life are also your contacts on Facebook, and obviously there's a lot of benefit to that. This is the main way that people understand the mechanism that Facebook uses for connecting people. However, as her reporting has shown, and as some of our own reporting has shown, there are lots and lots and lots of other ways that Facebook links people that you may not be aware of. And in some of this Gizmodo reporting, it highlighted some really interesting cases that I thought viewers of the show might take interest in. There is one case that she describes where it's kind of an individual whose father left the family decades earlier was recommended to be a friend with the person that her father left with, kind of the future wife. There are cases where somebody who adopted a child was recommended to be a friend with the person who gave that child up for adoption, and or the child rather was recommended to be friends with somebody who gave them up for adoption. All of these very strange links that you'll scratch your head and wonder, well, how on earth did Facebook know that? So I kind of wanted to pull the curtain back a little bit on today's show, and describe that. And again, if you're watching this, just tuning in, we're talking about how Facebook knows what it knows about you and how you can protect yourself if you're concerned about that level of data collection. Please feel free to leave any questions in the comment section wherever you're watching the show today. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. So basically, here's the basic rule of thumb that I think about when discussing Facebook. Facebook has this basic function, as I said, your contact list. We all kind of understand how that works. However, it should not be forgotten that Facebook is a voracious consumer of other data points about you when you're using their service. So if you've got the web page open on your computer and you're logged into Facebook, Facebook is collecting a massive amount of data about your activities on other websites that also send data to Facebook. It's the same as Google. They work the same way. If you're logged into that service, whether you're on your phone or whether you're on your computer, Facebook will be tracking you on all of those other sites and picking up clues along the way, clues such as your phone number. If you enter a phone number into a website, but you have not supplied that phone number to Facebook, that is a data point that the company collects that is potentially related to you. If you enter that phone number into multiple websites multiple times, that association grows stronger for the company. And these companies are all about algorithmic linking. So if you're entering the same email address, which is probably a better example, over and over and over again on different sites, Facebook is going to conclude that is an alternative email address that Facebook didn't have for you. And that kind of goes into this shadow profile. Also, phone numbers. If somebody has your phone number and they upload their contact list to Facebook, Facebook is going to recommend you and those people to be friends on Facebook. That's kind of understood. However, you have to think about the ways, there are numerous ways that type of data is transferred in the online ecosystem. It's not just people uploading their contact lists. Things like phone numbers and emails and addresses and even connections, friend connections. These are all commodities that are bought and sold online. And Facebook, again, is a voracious consumer of them. It's a little bit harder to use the data for a company like Facebook until it has a lot more data about you and it can figure out for certain, this is Jordan Robertson's cell phone number, this is Jordan Robertson's personal email, or something like that. However, Facebook consumes this data not just by looking at your other web browsing history, but also it buys data. It acquires data through third parties. And all of that information goes into the hopper. So if you're looking at some friend requests, as this Gizmodo story outlined, and you're wondering how on earth did they know that about me, I'm hoping the show will give you some insight into how that can be. It's not just that your friends gave you up. It's not just that they uploaded their contact list and they had your super secret cell phone number in there. That information is kind of quasi-public in a way, and Facebook is just a consumer of that, and it brings that data into its own network. With that, I'll get to some questions. Thank you for those of you writing in. First question here is, why should this be a problem? Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, part of the problem is that these friend suggestions may not always be friends. They might be ex-lovers. They might be somebody you have a restraining order against who has your phone number. And if your phone number is associated with your Facebook account, but you've deleted all other references, to your life, and somebody is recommended to you or you are recommended to them, and you're trying to stay away from them, that's a pretty big deal. Alternatively, if they are recommending people, who have your information, but it is through, these are suggestions that Facebook, these are implications and inferences that Facebook is drawing about your peer group that many people might not see as their peer group. To use the other example from earlier in the show, if, and I believe I'm getting this example right, some of the details might be a little off, but, somebody, a child who was adopted, was, the parents were recommended as friends, even though they had no online links. And, the way that can happen is any offline links, any exchange of phone numbers, exchange of emails, can create this online link on Facebook. And the problem becomes, do you want Facebook making those links about you? Do you want Facebook to know, all of your ex-lovers because, they at one point had your cell phone number? Maybe that's not a problem to some people. However, it does become part of this shadow profile of your life. And to answer this question, kind of a long-winded way of answering this question, is it creates a profile of your life that you are not fully in control of. You can't just delete that information from the Facebook database. You can delete friends and you can reject friend requests. You can't delete the record that Facebook has created about you and is using to suggest these friend requests. And that's really the problem there, is what does Facebook know about you and does it know more than you're comfortable with? Next question here is, how can I stop ads from following me on Facebook? Well, that's a slightly different question. I'm not a Facebook expert, but I will get it. That is a good opening to get to some of the tips and tricks for how you can prevent Facebook from suggesting potentially inappropriate friend requests. In terms of ads, you have to remember when you go on a service like Facebook or Google, these are advertising platforms. So while they may have tools, and they do have tools to help limit advertising against you, what you're basically agreeing to is limiting the targeted advertising. Eliminating ads entirely would be a different business model, and that's just not the business model that any of these companies are in. So it's worth remembering when these companies offer tools to limit advertising, that's really what it's doing. It's limiting the targeting of that advertising. And it's not a bad thing, but it's just a very different thing than saying, I would like an ad-free experience on any of these websites. So, so getting to some of the tips and tricks, if you go into the privacy settings and tools, and I recommend everybody do this, not just for Facebook, for LinkedIn, any other social media site that you use, the way in the privacy settings and tools, you can control the way people find you, and that's really the key thing here in terms of blocking potentially inappropriate friend suggestions. One of the questions here, and again, this is all from the Gizmodo story, which I want to give credit to, was kind of the inspiration for today's show, and was a bit of really good reporting. One of these questions is, who can look you up using the email address you provided? You can edit that setting, and you can set these things to all the way open or pretty closed. I say pretty closed because social media sites are not in the business of allowing you to block every potential avenue for somebody to find you. That's just not good for their business. That's not part of the ethos of these companies. So in some cases, for some types of settings, friends of friends, or maybe one level beneath is kind of as specific as you can get. In most cases, you're not going to get, don't let anybody find me, ever. Just don't go in expecting that. And for this question, it's who can look you up using the phone number you provided. You can click that and edit that to say friends. Now, again, the problem with that is it's very hard using these services to block all searches entirely and to block people from looking you up via your email address that you've given Facebook or your phone number. If they are in your network or tangentially in your network, this information is used to aggregate, and that's how these social services grow, these social networking services grow. So again, these are just one of the trade-offs of using these services. And you'll never catch me on the show saying, don't ever use Facebook, don't ever use LinkedIn or whatever. I mean, these are all valuable tools for all of us. However, you do need to be aware of the ways that people can find you. And you do have some level of controls in the privacy settings, but at the risk of beating a dead horse here, they're never going to be, almost without exception, they're never going to be absolute. They're never going to give you absolute privacy because that's just not in these companies' best interest. But there are some tools you can use. Excuse me. Let's see here. Next question here is, has Congress or any other federal agency ever passed a law that regulates data collection in the private sector? It's a pretty broad question, but let me answer it this way. When you sign up for a service, any service, whether it's Facebook or iTunes or pick your favorite internet service, and you agree to the terms of service, what you are doing is you are agreeing to a certain amount of data collection that is set by that company. So the problem from a regulatory perspective is, and I'm here in DC, we're surrounded by talk of regulation, and that's kind of the perennial discussion around technology. Silicon Valley obviously falls, for the most part, on the side of don't regulate. If you overregulate, you stifle innovation, and I tend to think that's right. So the answer to that is there are limits on what data can be shared. So there are, federal regulations around if you collect social security numbers, if you collect names, if you collect birth dates or credit card numbers, there are pretty well-established rules around how that data can be shared and whether it can be shared at all. However, when you start to get into data points like, take Google, for example. Google likely knows more about viewers of this show and anybody who's used the tool, medical history, than probably your doctor. Whenever any of us have some sort of symptoms, we type it into Google. That Google profile knows more about your medical history than probably the medical professional you see on a regular basis. How should that data be classified? That's not HIPAA-protected data. That is not, federally protected medical data. That's a search term that you entered using a service whose terms you've agreed to. So that's where things get really hairy, because then at Google at that point becomes, potentially the world's biggest repository for sensitive financial data, sensitive health data, sensitive location data, where you live, where you go, what physical locations you visit, whether it's doctor's offices or, gun shops or whatever. As a repository for sensitive information, you don't get much better than Google and Facebook, but that data is largely unregulated. They are free to sell it as they please. They are free to link it as they please. They don't tend to sell the raw data because that's proprietary to these services, but they certainly sell ads against it. And there are very, very few regulations around that for some obvious reasons. Next question here, and I like this one. The privacy settings are really confusing to me. How do I know what people really see? The reason I like this question is these are confusing by design. These companies will never say that on the record. Google, because of some federal pressure by the FTC, has some really excellent privacy settings now. They have to. No company wants to get regulated. They don't want the FTC or any other regulatory body, imposing laws on them about how their data, how their privacy settings should work. So these companies offer this stuff voluntarily. Again, Google has some really, really good privacy settings. You've got to look really hard for it. You've got to be determined. You've got to carve out, a period of time when it's quiet and you can concentrate and focus on finding this information and making sure you have all of it. And a great example of that is, you might dial down your privacy settings, or dial up rather your privacy settings on Gmail, so that the data collected while you're using Gmail is very minimal to none. The problem becomes you've also then got to go do those settings on other Google accounts like YouTube or Google Plus or whatever, and you've got to go one by one in most cases and tinker with those settings. So it is this, to the viewer who asked this question, it is this way on purpose. That's a cynical view, but it's a realistic view. These companies, again, they're not in the business of making it easy to opt out of things. There's this perennial debate in the privacy community, the digital privacy community, about opt-in versus opt-out. The way to ensure absolute privacy is to have an opt-in model, such as, I go to Google and it will ask me, do you choose to share data? Do you choose to allow Google to monitor what you search for and use that for targeted ads, or to use that to improve its search algorithms? That's an opt-in model. Problem is, most people say, no, I don't like that. That seems kind of creepy to me. So most companies are kind of an opt-out model, and that is not a consumer-friendly focus. But long way of answering this question, how do you know what people really see? Well, again, this web page, you may not be able to see it, but this gives you a really good example of what some of those levels are. You can see who can send you friend requests. In this page provided by Gizmodo, it's set to everyone. You want anybody to be able to friend you, regardless of how they find you. But the next level down is, how can people look you up? If they can look you up using your email address, you might want to restrict that to just current friends on the network, or friends of friends, if you want it to be a slightly wider net. However, again, what you're not going to find on a lot of these sites is a setting that says block everything. I don't want to be found. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to exist. Next question here. Thank you for all the great questions coming in. We're getting some good ones here. I deactivated friend requests on my account. Will that help me stay private? Well, again, I'm not a Facebook expert. Cybersecurity is kind of my specialty. But what I will say is this. This question, the notion of staying private when you're using these sites, is one that really needs to be interrogated pretty strongly. Because limiting one tool or limiting one feature like friend requests, which, if that's an important part of your experience on Facebook, limiting who can ask you to become a friend, which is totally valid and totally legitimate, that's only one really small part of being quote-unquote private when you use these sites. As I mentioned earlier in the show, if that feature works for you, then great. Then that's wonderful. They provided a valuable service in the settings feature. However, it's all of the back-end collection that is not visible to most people that really gets to the notion of what is privacy when it comes to these companies. Take for example, if you are logged into Facebook or Google on one browser page and you open up another browser page and you go somewhere else, they still track you. They still track you because all of these sites are affiliated. Many of these sites are affiliated, and they send data back and forth. So are you still being private? Is your privacy still respected? When you open up a brand new web page and you think you're going to a page that Facebook is not tracking you on, but it is. That is a question that the technology industry doesn't really like to talk about a lot because it does get to this idea of utility and usefulness. Like if you block all of your data from being shared with Facebook, Facebook's probably not going to be the greatest experience for you. You're not going to have as many kind of surprise encounters with old friends that is what makes the service fun. So you have to kind of define what it means to you to be protected in your privacy. And one of my biggest tips, one of the tips I give all the time, is you don't have to be a technical expert to maintain some level of privacy. And one of the biggest ways you can do that is logging out of these services when you're done using them. So instead of keeping Facebook or Google, Gmail open all day long on your desktop because it's more convenient, if you don't want Google tracking you on other sites, there's some certain technical ways to do that, but also a pretty easy way is to log out of that service. That will not eliminate it entirely. I can already hear the technical folks, there are a million different ways that Google can track you beyond that, but a pretty simple way is log out of the service, log out of the app when you plan to do something else that you'd prefer these sites don't track you with. Next question here, how can I stop Facebook from picking up my location and sometimes sharing them? Again, I hate to be kind of repetitive here. I'm not a Facebook expert. I'm not even an expert on a lot of these settings. But what I am an expert on is that all of these sites do have some settings, especially regarding location. Location is a very sensitive thing, and most people would agree that sharing your location by default with some of these sites is probably not a great thing. So there are typically ways to deactivate the sharing of location data within the app or within Facebook itself. However, what I will add as well is that there are other ways for these apps to determine your location. It's not just one way. Through things like your cell phone towers, Wi-Fi hotspots. Don't forget about those. Picking up nearby Wi-Fi hotspots is a way for triangulating your location as well. So there are lots of different ways these companies can identify your location, but there will be a setting in almost all of them that states whether you want your location shared or not. That actually tends to be one of the easier things to do. Another question here, should I always use an incognito window? I like this question as well because I think there's misunderstanding about what an incognito window is. This is a feature in it's widely used in browsers such as Chrome. Which all it does, it appears to give you privacy. It doesn't give you privacy. What it does is it prevents somebody who comes onto the computer after you from seeing what you did. So it's a local-based storage issue. So what an incognito window gives you is when you click it on and like the secret spy eyes icon comes on the screen and it tells you you're browsing in incognito mode, all that means is that data will not be stored locally on your browser about that session. So cookie data, history data, things like that. That's useful, if you're trying to stay private at your home computer, I guess. But it's not what people think it is, and that's a really important point to make. Google still has that information. Google knows that you're in incognito mode, and Google still collects that data. That data still exists on Google servers. It just may not exist in your browser itself. So I'd be careful with incognito mode. You just have to know what exactly it is and what it isn't. If you're expecting to stay private, and that's not to say you shouldn't use Google, you shouldn't use Facebook. You just have to be, I'm a big advocate of awareness. You just have to be aware of what they're collecting and how, and what that might look like, frankly, if it ever leaked. If Google got hacked and your entire search history were leaked, how would you feel about that? I think most of us would be pretty upset about that because it reveals a whole lot that you would not want public. We've got some comments here as well that I want to respond to. One of these is the more advanced the technology, the lesser privacy we own. I don't know that I agree totally with that. I think the more advanced the technology gets, the better companies get at figuring out how to part you with your data. That is the currency of the online realm. It is your data. It's not money. It is your data, and that is what you're exchanging, for use of these services. So the advancing technology allows companies to get better at recording your data and using it. But that's not inherently the bargain that we all kind of have to live with. It's just the way it is now. But I think with better awareness, people's understanding of what is the real value of that exchange. When you log into a site like Google or Facebook, what is the value to Google? What is the value to you? Are you comfortable with that exchange of information? And if you are, then everything's good. If you're not, this is a discussion that we're going to have more and more, especially as you move to things like autonomous cars and things like that, where it is collecting a massive amount of data about your physical location, about your comings and goings, in an even greater way than is done now. Another comment here is the amount of people who have no idea how much software companies can see is uncanny. Here's my response to that. I think in general, we understand at a very kind of surface level, Google knows a lot about us because we do everything on Google. We do everything on Facebook. I think what's been really revealing is when in some European countries they have required that companies like Facebook and Google supply people who ask the entire data profile on those individuals. It's shocking. I mean, these things are hundreds and hundreds of pages long, and these are like GPS location, when and where you've sent messages, what the content of those messages are, what you've looked up. When you see this stuff, I encourage you guys to Google it. Go Google some of these stories of all things, and you will see pictures of what your profile looks like when it's printed out, and there have been some pretty famous cases of this. They're massive. I don't know if everybody's comfortable with that. I think if Google sent that to everyone's house who is a user, I think you'd have a lot more people saying, hey, maybe this privacy thing is actually kind of really important, because if that were to ever leak, or if somebody else were to get that information, that's a whole lot of information about our lives that is basically unprotected in terms of if that were to ever leak. That's pretty embarrassing information for a lot of us. The last comment here, thank you again for writing in and for tuning in. We really appreciate the engagement here. Last comment here that we've got time for is, so we know that these companies are collecting data through our search engine history, our likes, profile, and contact lists, and friend lists. So what this viewer is saying is, look, everybody already knows this is how they collect data. My challenge to that would be this Gizmodo story, and I think just watching people discuss these issues in general, I think people have a very surface level understanding of course, Google's going to look at that information. Of course, they're going to look at my email. They have to serve me this email. I think what is not generally well known is, what does it look like when that profile is taken in aggregate? When you take all that information, not just about you, but what Google and Facebook think they know about who you know, and that are not currently in your network. When these companies start to make those guesses about who you may know based on data points in your profile and in theirs, and even from third-party data sources, that's where things get spooky, because sometimes they're really, really right and in a spooky way, but you don't exactly want to be friends with the people they suggest. And sometimes they're wrong, but when you give companies the opportunity to showcase what their data mining algorithms can do, again, I would encourage people to look up some of these stories where people have gotten their full dossiers from social media companies or from Google, and they've printed it out. Take a look at that. And when you see 800 or 1,000 pages or more of people's digital histories, it might make you think differently about, do I care or not that companies have this information? Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not massive behind the scenes. And that's just really important for all of us to know as we use these services. Well, with that, we're out of time. We always go over on the show. I really appreciate the comments and the engagement. I hope I've answered your questions in a helpful way. I find this to be a really fascinating issue. And on the show, we try to be all about providing valuable insight and guidance and advice, and I hope we've accomplished that today. As always, you can find us on the web at bloomberg.com/technology. There you're going to get archived editions of the show. You'll also see a show by my colleague Mark Gurman called Gadgets with Gurman, where he does a lot of great technology reviews and breaks a lot of news there. And you'll also see a podcast called Decrypted that's there. I'm on Twitter. It's at JordanR1000, Jordan, the letter R1000. Please feel free to email me there, message me there with any questions or comments you have about this show. With that, we need to sign off here. Thanks so much for watching. We broadcast live typically noon Eastern every Thursday. We will see you here next week at that time. Thanks again for watching Digital Defense.